Hi, I'm Peggy Farron. Welcome to the Understand Photography Show, where we talk about travel, nature, and fine art photography. Today we're going to be talking with Michael Milicia, am I right there? Milicia, about creativity and inspiration in bird photography. But first, remember, the Understand Photography Show is first a podcast, so if you're watching this on YouTube or Facebook and you're wondering why we don't have any visuals, that's why. We have a lot more listeners than viewers, so this is kind of the behind the scenes that you're seeing if you're watching us. If you check out our website at understandphotography.com, you will see where Mike has given us some beautiful pictures, so you've got to check out his photography. It's amazing. So our website is understandphotography.com, and you'll see it says the Understand Photography Show. It's a tab right on the top, so you can click and see all of Mike's not all of his pictures, but some of Mike's beautiful pictures. And then, of course, Heather does a great job of summarizing the key points of each show. So you can just kind of read the bullets. If we talk about anything today, the links will be in there, that kind of stuff. When you go to our understandphotography.com website, you'll see on the front page it says click here for freebies. Click on that and then choose something that sounds interesting to you, or you can choose all of them, and then you'll be put on our mailing list. We send out a newsletter once a month, just telling you what we have going on. We have at least 2 or 3 different photo tips in there, and our motto at Understand Photography is we simplify the technical. So keep that in mind when you're going through our website. So Michael Milicia is an amazing bird photographer and instructor. He's had his work published in National Geographic and Audubon, an outdoor photographer, Nature's Best. I mean, he's out there. He's a big shot. So welcome, Mike.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Now, so what got you into bird photography as opposed to landscape photography or people photography?
Well, I've always had an interest in wildlife photography from way back. It's just in looking at wildlife photography. But I never really took it seriously. I just sort of would take snapshots and not really learn about how to do it. When I finally decided to start learning about photography and looking at various books, I just realized I kept finding myself drawn toward the bird photographs.
Okay.
And I think what happened there was just the way, birds themselves are sort of, they're works of art in and of themselves sometimes. So in terms of just creating something that's aesthetically appealing to people that aren't even necessarily into birds, they had that advantage. They also had the advantage of the fact that I live in New England, where there's not much other wildlife readily available other than birds. And then once I started getting into it, then it just gets addicting in terms of just the number of species available, the different places you can go to photograph birds, and it just kind of took on a life of its own.
Okay.
Like I really sometimes wonder myself how I got here, but that's kind of how the evolution started. I wasn't really a birder before. I'm still not a birder. I don't really go out and look for birds unless I'm trying to photograph them.
You're a bird photographer.
I'm a bird photographer. So that has advantages and disadvantages, but that's how I got here.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And you do have quite a few birds in. Now, do you live near the coast?
Yes, not too far away. Yeah. So
you have even more.
In the summertime, there's some great opportunities, but other than that, there aren't a whole lot of really hot spots going on. We have a few places, but it's few and far between in New England compared to, say, Florida, for example.
Do you come down here in the winter? Do you?
Sometimes,
you give workshops, right?
I do give workshops. I don't do that many field workshops. I also do classes at home as well. But
okay.
I do 2 or 3 workshops a year. I do workshops in Iceland and New Mexico. I haven't set up any down here yet. We'll see when I come down here. It's just on my own.
Well, we've done some. I don't know what the right word is, but like design tours for some of the other photographers who do Everglades tours. So.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
So let us know if that interests you.
Could. Very well could.
I mean, we live here,
yeah,
so.
Exactly. That's part of the problem.
And boy,
is doing all the scouting.
There are a lot of birds here in the winter.
Yes.
Gosh, it's crazy.
We often refer to doing bird photography down here as cheating.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a whole different ballgame.
And it's so funny to us, a pink spoonbill or roseate spoonbill is not an exotic bird.
Right.
And people come from up north and they're like, oh my gosh. First they think they're flamingos, which they're not, but You know, we have all these cool birds, but we see them all the time. No big deal.
Yeah,
They're in the front. Ibises all over your front yard. It's so cool.
Exactly.
So cool. And I just became into birding about a year maybe or so ago. I got a bird feeder.
Oh, nice.
And now I have a second one because it's one of those cages so that the painted buntings can come. Oh
okay.
my God, those are beautiful
Those
birds.
are incredible birds.
So I have them every day.
Yeah, it's a nice yard bird to have.
I know, right in front of my window. Okay, so now so you said your tours are, now do you do the same tours every year, or how does that work?
At this point, the only field tours I'm doing are Iceland and New Mexico. I do Bosque del Apache in New Mexico, and I go to Iceland twice.
Okay.
2 different Iceland tours. I've been to Iceland like 12 times now. So.
And I didn't think of Iceland as a birding area.
In the summertime, it's loaded with nesting birds. So I've only ever been there, say, between May and July. I've never actually seen Iceland, like I've never seen Iceland in the dark, because it's always 24-hour daylight when I'm there.
Oh my gosh.
But no, they get a lot of nesting birds, a lot of nesting shorebirds. And the place, it's just, there's birds everywhere. So
That's
birds
so
are a
cool.
very integral part of Icelandic life. And this sort of the same way here, but totally different species.
Yeah.
But things that, you know, people have yard birds, like, you know, common snipe is a yard bird, which we would, you know, people go out of their way to see that. So it's definitely very birdy in the summertime.
Oh, that's so
Yeah,
cool.
and in particular, they have the largest population of puffins in the world, something like 80% or
In
don't quote me on the
Iceland?
statistic, as far as nesting. Yeah, puffins for the most part live at sea, but they come to land to nest.
Because I know you have some in Maine.
There are just maybe like
And
a
in
couple hundred in Maine.
Where does Artie Morse go?
But
He goes to
there's-
Scotland or someplace,
There's some
right?
off of Scotland, yeah.
But there's way more in Iceland?
I think it's 80% of the population nests in Iceland or something.
They are
like that.
such cute birds.
Yeah.
They're not cute, they're beautiful. They're
Right.
like you said,
They've
they're
got a lot
works
of
of
personality.
art.
They're works of art. They've got personality.
And then with the
love
fish,
them.
people get those fish
Exactly.
in their
We
beaks.
go there
and-
specifically in July to get them with the fish, because they'll only do that once the chicks are hatched. Then they'll start bringing the fish back. Otherwise, they're just feeding while they're out at sea. But
Oh,
they'll bring
okay.
the fish back for the chicks.
So you
that's
know
what
a lot
people
about
really
bird
want.
behavior that I don't know.
I end up learning about it by observing. Yeah, exactly.
Well,
just
you
by
have
watching
to.
it happen.
If
Exactly.
you want to take
Yep.
pictures of them, you have to
Yep,
know what
that's
they're
one
going
of
to
the
do.
keys.
And
Yep.
and how do you learn? Do you study or do you?
I mostly just by being out there and
Experience.
just by just spending a lot of time with particular species. So from birder friends of mine, they can recognize far more birds. They can recognize birds by song. All these skills that would be very useful for me. But I find that a lot of times I've actually spent more time with the birds, so I know sometimes more about the behavior part than they might, because they're more interested in seeing and then moving on. Whereas I'll sometimes sit with a bird for an hour and watch everything it does. So.
That's interesting. Well, experience.
Yeah.
You know, Joe Fitzpatrick, who works here, he's very technical, and the technical side of photography is, I mean, I have so much experience that, yes, I know what I'm doing, but it doesn't ever come easy for me. But I have so much experience that I just know things.
Yep.
Like you sit there with those birds and you just know what they're going to do because you have the
Sometimes,
experience
hopefully,
with
yeah.
them.
Exactly. Or birds are also very habitual, so sometimes you may have never seen a behavior before, but if they do it once, they're very likely to do it again.
Oh.
So that's always sort of a clue. Then you wait for it.
Okay.
So.
But you can learn that in books and the internet if you want to.
Yes, you can. Yeah.
You know, if you want to speed up the process.
Yep.
If you're like, okay, because, a lot of our customers, or whatever you want to call it, our viewers, our listeners, they could be, newly retired and they want us to just take something up, or they're into photography and they've just we have a Facebook group called Selling Your Photography as Art.
Oh, nice.
And one of the things that we just kind of harp on all the time is you have to have a niche
Yes.
and a
yes.
look.
Yes,
So
exactly.
if they say, okay,
exactly.
I love birds, I'm going to learn about birds, you
Yep.
can accelerate the process of learning.
Yes, definitely.
Now,
definitely.
your bird images have this really nice portrait quality to them. You've got a lot of separation between the subjects and your backgrounds. How do you achieve that look?
It's mostly by looking for situations that will give you that look.
Okay.
In other words, I'm always looking for a situation where I've got a bird, say, perched at the top of a tree with nothing behind it for a long distance so that the background will wash out. So it's really about looking for the right situation to get that kind of effect. It's not really about camera settings. It's not really about how I take the picture. I generally don't think much about, say, aperture or depth of field. I'm mostly usually concerned with shutter speed because I've got moving subjects. So the aperture kind of just falls wherever it does to get the shutter speed I need. And it's really more about the situation, just looking for, I may have 50 birds in front of me, but only one is in the right location to get the kind of effect I'm looking for.
So you're looking for the background?
I'm looking at the background. I'm generally in the lighting. Generally trying to, depending on the time of day, generally trying to have the light at my back. Earlier in the day, you can do, like really early in the day, maybe the first half hour, you can do more dramatic side lighting or backlighting. But once the sun gets, say, beyond the golden hour, you really do have to kind of be more or less on light angle, possibly a little bit off to get a little more detail, because you also don't want things to be flat lit.
Yeah, yeah.
So, but then the higher the sun gets, the more important you really have to go for that direct front lighting. But as it's coming up, sometimes I'll get a few degrees off light angle to get a little more texture, a little more detail in the subject.
But you could get some ugly shadows if you get too side.
You don't want to get too far, especially as the sun gets higher.
Now, what kind of lens are you using normally, or do you have a range of lenses?
I have a range of lenses. What I end up using mostly for birds, I had been using a 500 millimeter lens. I just recently switched to a 600.
And is it just a 600, or is it?
It's just a 600 f.
Holy
600
cow!
f4.
How much does that weigh?
The newest Canon lens they've made a lot of strides with getting them lighter. It's down to, don't quote me on the weight, but it's
still heavy.
Down to like 6 pounds or so. So it's fairly light compared. I mean, every time I pick it up, still I'm amazed at how light it is. The latest version of the Canon lenses are incredibly light.
Now you're going to have a
that's helped a
shallow
lot.
depth of field no matter what if you have a lens like that, right?
Well, it's not really about. No matter what lens you use, if the subject is the same size in the frame, you have the same depth of field.
Okay.
What makes long lenses give you a creamier background are the fact that they give you more background blur. In other words, the same amount of the subject is sharp.
Right.
The depth of field is the same.
Okay.
But a longer lens will give you more blur in the background.
Oh, okay.
So that
So
sort
that
of
helps with your separation.
That helps a lot, yeah. So there are things about long lenses like that. Long lenses are not just about, a lot of people think they just need them because they can't get close.
Yeah.
But that's a good use for them, but they give you other benefits as well. Like they do give you more background blur. They give you the ability sometimes to change. There may be a bird, high up in a tree, and with a shorter lens, you're pointing at a high angle, whereas with a longer lens, you can back up and decrease the angle, make it look more eye level.
Yeah.
So there are other things. Also, just gives you more isolation. You don't see as much of the background. So if you've got a busy area around in the environment, the long lens, even if you make, again, the subject the same size, you'll see less of the surrounding background. So it's easier to isolate things.
Okay.
So when you do move from a shorter lens to a longer lens, yes, you don't have to get as close and maybe you won't spook the birds as much, but you suddenly start being more productive, and you suddenly start getting more pictures. And those are some of the reasons why, because it's much easier to isolate things. You get nicer backgrounds, that kind of thing.
What are the drawbacks besides the weight?
That's pretty
And
much
the cost.
it. That's pretty much the cost and the weight. The cost is a big problem.
How much are do you
the
remember?
new Canon 600 is about $13,000.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a lot. Which is one of the reasons I try to make some amount of income back from this.
Yeah, you got to justify
Yeah,
those expenditures.
Exactly. Yep.
Well, the biggest drawback that I can think of is you really have to have a fast shutter speed, don't you?
With good lens technique, if you're on a tripod and so forth, I mean, I've shot plenty of tack sharp things at a 30th of a second, 50th of a second, if you have the right
With
technique.
a 600
With a
millimeter
600,
lens?
yep, exactly. Sometimes even 600 with teleconverter on it, or I have a lot of things, like when I had the 500, I would use the 2x teleconverter. So even 1,000 millimeters at 50th of a second, again, if you have really good technique, yes.
And
I'll sometimes go into say either mirror lockup or use live view to get mirror lockup in those kind of situations. But yeah, it's as long as you have good technique. And the image stabilization these days can provide up to, I think it's up to 4 stops or 5 stops extra. So
you're
depends a lot on
using
your
a
technique.
tripod with a gimbal head, though, right?
I'm currently using a variation of a gimbal head. I use a tripod head called Unique Ball.
Unique Ball.
Unique Ball. It's made by a
Okay.
company called Unique Ball. So it
Oh,
looks like a ball
what an
head.
interesting name.
It's unique. And the unique thing about it is that if you use a ball head with a longer lens, it's a problem because it gets very floppy, flops off to the side. Well, this is a ball head. It looks like a ball head, but it's designed so that the ball only moves. You can only pan and tilt, just like with a gimbal. It will not let it go any other way. So it's a much more compact head. It's easier for traveling. It's actually, in some ways, more stable than a gimbal because you're actually mounted right on top of the head, unlike having an arm come out with the platform with a little more, torque problems to it. But
How long have you
there are
been using
advantages
that?
to it. Oh, probably 3 years now.
So
4
you're
years.
you're sold on it. You think it's a good.
Yeah, there's another company doing a similar one as well now too. But yeah, at this point, the only time I used to use a Wimberley gimbal head, the problem is it's much more bulky, much more difficult to travel with, much heavier. I still use that on the beach if I'm doing shorebird photography, where I'm lying on the beach and so forth, and that mostly because then it provides me a way to be able to hold the camera. I can sometimes pick. Once you get all dirty and wet, you don't want to be dripping on your camera.
Right.
So I'll often use the Wimberley kind of as a handle to be able to hold it off to my side.
Ah,
So,
okay.
because otherwise, just the regular tripod head, I'd have to touch the camera all the time. Whereas
Okay.
the Wimberley gives me a handle. But other than that, at this point, I'm pretty much using the Unique Ball.
The Unique Ball. That's new
Yeah.
to me. I'm not familiar with it at all. So we'll put a link to their website in the show
Sure,
notes.
sure.
So that's interesting. What else? I had another technical question to ask you, but I think I lost it in my head. All right, we'll
No
just move
problem.
on. All right, so what is the key to capturing the expressions? I mean, first of all, you almost have to have a long lens to get the expressions, right?
Well, it depends where you're at. There are places like the Falkland Islands where the penguins there have no fear of humans whatsoever. You can literally get within a couple feet. You can get within 1 foot if you're very slow in moving. So it depends where you're at. But generally speaking, yes, in order to get close enough,
To get the
long
really
lenses
cool-
definitely help.
Because birds have personalities.
They do, and that's what I try to portray. That's really what I'm looking for, and it's mostly just waiting for that moment, waiting until you see it in the. I'll sometimes be waiting for a particular bird to land in a particular place for, say, an hour, and it will then land and sit there for 5 minutes, and I won't take a single shot because it never gave me the expression, it never gave me the look, it never looked at me. It looked away the whole time, or it just never gave me what I'm looking for. So it's just a matter of waiting for it, and when you see it, being able to react and capture it.
What do you do while you're waiting?
Well,
I get so bored. That's why I don't think I could ever be a bird photographer because
I used
although
to do
it is pretty easy down here in the winter.
it's
just-
easier, definitely. I used to do a lot of art fairs and stuff, and people would always come up to me and say, "You must be incredibly patient." And my answer would always be, it's not so much patience as it is obsession. So if you're obsessed enough and you want it bad enough, I'm generally not a patient person, but I'll sit for an hour and wait for a bird because I want that picture. So I'm very obsessive
just
about it.
sit there?
I
You
just
just-
want it. Sometimes you just have to sit there
You just
and
sit
wait.
there.
Yeah. Well, sometimes. I mean, if you're in a situation where you know something's likely to happen,
Right,
it
right.
may take an hour to happen, but you're pretty sure it's going to happen.
Do you sit?
Then
Do you bring something to sit
I'll
on?
sometimes sit. It depends on the situation. Yeah.
Or do you sometimes just sit there looking through your camera waiting for something to happen for a whole hour?
Again, it can happen. Yeah,
Oh, wow. That's
for waiting
amazing to me.
for the bird to show up. If you know it's someplace that things are going to show up. I was over at Wakota earlier, my first visit there, and there was a particular area where there was this beautiful pool of water that was very flat, so it was getting great reflections. The trees were reflecting into it. It was beautiful, but there were no birds. But I'd seen birds there the day before, and if and when they arrived, it was going to be an amazing sort of situation to try and get some nice pictures. So the next day when I went back, I sat there for about a half hour waiting for them to arrive. But I had a pretty good chance they were going to. So, but I
Okay.
wanted to be there when they did, because once there were too many of them, then it was harder to isolate them and so forth.
Oh,
so I wanted to
right.
be there when
As
they started
they were
coming
arriving.
in.
Oh,
And so I could maybe
okay.
get flight shots as they come in, and then get the beautiful reflections in the water once they started walking around.
Now, what do you think keeps you going as far as like continuing with continuing being so specific as a bird photographer?
I think it's mostly that, I can appreciate any kind of nature photography pretty much, but there's just nothing that takes my breath away like a good bird photograph. And so that's kind of just what really draws me to it. I will photograph other wildlife. I will, I've been to Africa twice this year, and we did a lot of mammals and so forth, and it was interesting and it was fun. It was amazing to see the animals, but I still don't get as excited about it as I do about a bird.
About the birds.
There's just something about.
And you don't know what it is. You can't put your finger on it?
The fact that you can get so much personality into them, you can get more of them. You can usually more create, a lot of other wildlife photography is more about the spectacle and the drama and the nature story, whereas birds I find can be more about the sort of the emotional connection and I think, that just things that appeal to people. But,
okay. Do you have a favorite bird?
Whichever one's in front of the camera. No, I don't really. I mean, I do like puffins. I do like penguins. They're pretty hard not to like. But no, I don't really have a.
I'm going to see penguins for my first time when we go to. Other than the zoo.
Yeah. Yeah.
When we go to South Africa, I didn't even know South
yes.
Africa had penguins.
Yes, they do.
Oh, so I'm kind of excited about that because you're right. They got such cute little personalities, and I've watched them. We had an exhibit here at the Naples Zoo for a little while with penguins. That was kind of cool. So, now you said you were doing the art show circuit for a while. Are you still doing that?
No, I'm not.
How long did you do it?
I did it for 3 or 4 years.
I did it for about 2.
In New England, it's not. I think you have more vibrant scene for it down here than you do in New England. But the problem I was really running into was what motivates me to do this, again, is a lot of it is just being out in nature and being in wild places. And I really like to just photograph birds in their natural environment. I don't do a lot of blinds or setups or that kind of a thing to get those pictures.
Okay.
And so it actually turns out to be very difficult if you're just trying to be out in nature to get pictures of what most people consider their yard birds in New England, like cardinals and blue jays and robins. And so they're actually very difficult to get unless you specifically set up a feeder and make an effort to get them, and that just isn't what motivates me. So I didn't have those pictures, and that's really what everyone wants. Whereas, like you said, down here, everyone knows what an ibis is, or many more people, whereas in New England, they really don't. There's only a few birds they're familiar with, so it wasn't really a market for what I was doing.
Yeah. Well, location and what you're selling makes a huge difference,
Oh yeah, definitely.
And here, I think, it's interesting though, because I know a photographer here, and I don't know, I lost touch with him, but he was doing the art shows selling scenes of Tuscany and doing extremely well, which I would have never thought that would be something in Florida that people would want to buy.
Yeah.
But he did extremely well, so you never know.
Yep.
But yeah, I think, it's the fastest way to make money, and if you want to sell your art, is by doing the art shows, but it is a grueling thing to do.
Yeah, and so I sort of finally decided to just really concentrate on the teaching part, because that's
now do you
I'm
have a studio or a classroom of some sort?
No,
or is it one-on-one?
Usually either I'll teach, I do one-on-ones, I'll teach class. A friend of mine, I think he was on the show actually recently, Sean Carey, he and I did a workshop, one-day seminar at Mass Audubon, so we'll do things like that. Or I'll often just rent a hotel conference room and do it that way.
Okay. And you do the one-on-one stuff too?
Yeah, I definitely.
Because
absolutely.
that's a huge part of our business at this point. I'm like, I never even put it in my business plan because I never realized how many people wanted the one-on-one.
Yes, no, it's definitely.
And we do the one-on-one, but then we started doing tours, like Everglades tours, and we do a lot of private Everglades tours, which
nice.
really surprised me because I thought, it's because it's really expensive.
Yeah.
But people want. But you know what? I do it. I'm not a rich person, but when the reason we did the Tuscany trip is because when I went to Tuscany, I paid a fortune to this guy.
Right, exactly.
Because how do I know where to go?
Yeah.
This guy's a professional photographer with amazing pictures. I'm going with him,
Exactly.
So you're on vacation, somehow the money you could justify the money a little bit easier. Now, is this your full-time living?
Yes. Yes.
Wow, that's
yes.
exciting.
It's more of like a second career. I'm kind of fortunate to be in the situation where I'm not dependent on it to put food on the table.
Wow.
So I have a little more flexibility with, I can afford to be a little more choosy about what I do. So
How often do you go out on your own locally? Like, do you go out every 3 times a week?
I don't, and mainly because I don't find there to be that many opportunities
Where you live.
where I live. And I mean, there are if you're willing to spend possibly the whole day doing it, just for maybe one picture, and it just does not seem to me to be the most productive use of my time.
Okay,
And
so
so mostly at home, I'm doing things like developing classes, or putting things together for camera clubs, or doing the office work part of things, that kind of thing, or trying to learn more. But I go out as much as I can when I'm at home, but I don't really find the.
Well, how do you get the pictures then?
I get a lot of my pictures during my trips, but
Okay.
then again, when the hot spots are around, like there's a wildlife refuge not far from my house that is one of the best places probably in the country to photograph, particularly marsh wrens and red-winged blackbirds. So during that season, for that month, yeah, I'll go there a lot. But
And what's
then
a lot?
that kind of goes away.
I'm just nosy.
A lot, possibly a couple times a week,
And how?
2 or
And you
3
go
times
just
a
in the
week.
morning or just
Just
in the
mornings
afternoon?
mostly. It's much better in the mornings. There's no people there. The birds are a little more active, so I mostly do that in the morning.
Okay.
The afternoons there tends to be a lot more people around.
I I don't get out hardly ever, and I'm very envious of all these people who come on my show and they go out every day and all
no,
this
that's
other
not
stuff.
me.
And then of course I'm Facebook friends with everybody who's retired because I live in Florida.
Yeah.
And they all go out and they photograph and they go here and they take these trips, and I'm so jealous.
Yeah.
I'm so envious. So it's kind of inspiring
the
to
fun
me
part, but-
to see that you can be, have this nice body of work,
Yeah.
but you're not going out every single day. I
Definitely
would love
not.
to go out every
Definitely
day.
not. Yeah.
I got to work is my problem. Do you spend a lot of time in editing?
Way too much time.
Okay.
Yes.
And what do you do to edit your
what-
photos?
what's the time-consuming part for me is going through the thousands of photos to find the one that I want to work on. As far as actually processing a photo, I don't spend that much time on it.
What do
no.
you do in general?
For processing?
Yeah.
I do mostly as much as I can. I don't use Lightroom. I just use Photoshop tools
Okay.
and built some other filters. I use some Nik filters and I guess now the company's called Luminar, some other, and recently been experimenting with some Topaz stuff. But I mostly do as much as I can in Adobe Camera Raw, because the more I can do there, the less I have to do in Photoshop, and also that they've got the most information to work with at that
So
point.
you're just like
So
putting some contrast
I'm
in?
looking
or-
at make sure I get the color right. I'm looking for, possibly, this a little bit of a bright spot, so I might tone it down a little bit. I might, maybe brighten up the catchlight in the eye. I mean, I do
Okay.
whatever I can to get it right then, picking the right, camera profile, those kind of things. And then usually once I get into Photoshop, I'm doing noise reduction if I have to, and then maybe run one of these. Well, I'm still using the older software. The company used to be called MacFun.
Oh, I've
So I
heard of
use
it.
Intensify Pro, and that's pretty much all I do.
And what does Intensify Pro do?
It gives you a lot of what do they call it? Mid-tone contrast type of adjustments, and
Okay.
I just basically have some built-in settings, a bunch of presets, and I'll
That
just
you-
apply the one that looks the best.
What's,
I'd really
what's the name of the company now?
Luminar. I
Oh,
believe
Luminar.
is the name of it.
Okay,
now, yeah.
okay. So Luminar bought Nick and they bought MacFun? Is that
No,
what you're saying?
I believe.
Or
Again,
I
don't
don't
quote me
even
on this.
know.
I believe MacFun. I'm not sure who bought who, but I think
Yeah.
MacFun. I think they just changed their name to Luminar.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
because that's a weird name.
Yeah. Yeah.
Luminar's
Yeah.
a better name. Now, do you use custom white balance in the field, or?
I do not. I usually use automatic white balance when I'm in the field. I find it gets close enough.
And you're
At least
shooting in
gives me-
RAW?
And I'm shooting in RAW, but then I'll make sure that once I get it into, if it didn't get it right, I'll tweak it.
In Photoshop,
in
in RAW,
Photoshop.
in
In RAW,
Adobe
yeah,
Camera RAW.
in RAW, absolutely.
Now, do you use, like if you take pictures in the early morning and there's a goldish tone, do you
Yep.
like that, or do you
I
fix it?
like it to a degree. I definitely don't completely neutralize it, but if it's super early where it's just
Really yellow?
really yellow, I don't tend to like it.
I
To
don't
me,
like
it
it too
obscures a
yellow
lot of
either.
the detail.
Yeah.
I will add a little bit of blue in those situations. Yeah, it's almost, I think there's a concept of too much of that for what I do at least.
Yeah, I do too.
But you don't want to, I definitely don't get rid of it completely. It's a very nice look when you get that. But
Yeah, most of the time it's pretty, but sometimes it just comes out too
I
yellowy
agree.
or
I
something.
agree. Yep.
And especially on birds. Well, I get like a
Exactly.
brown
Exactly.
bird or
Yep.
something.
Yep.
It just kind of, I
yeah,
don't know.
I
I
really
don't like
think
that
it
look
just
too much.
it just obscures the detail too much. So
Is
I'll
that what
just
it is?
Add a little bit of blue, and it looks a little better to me.
Okay.
But-
So now, are you a Canon shooter, Nikon?
Yes,
You
Canon.
said Canon.
Canon,
Yeah. Okay. Okay. What kind of cam? You got a big old 1D.
1DX Mark II. Yeah.
And how important is it to have a full frame camera in bird photography?
I don't think it's that important to have a full frame camera. It's just a matter of the fact that a lot of the higher end cameras that are better at things like noise performance and better at things like frames per second and just generally have more features and functions tend to be the full frame cameras. I don't think it's the full frame itself that gives you any particular advantage or disadvantage.
Okay, interesting. And now, how often do you use extenders?
Depends where I'm at. At home.
Oh, well, that makes sense.
At home, quite often the 1.4 teleconverter is just glued to the big lens because I need it all the time.
And so 1.4
So-
times 600 is what?
That would give me 840.
840.
Yeah. So it depends where I'm at, but I do not hesitate to use them when I need them. I find at least the Canon ones perform really well.
And you use the Canon brand on that?
Definitely, because they're actually integrated with the lens. They actually communicate with each other, and I think
Do they
it
have
is
off brands
beneficial.
like that? I don't even
They
know.
do. You can buy off-brand teleconverters, but
you
they don't
don't.
have the optimization built into them.
Okay. And for anybody who doesn't know how to use a teleconverter,
Right.
what do you explain it to us? You're the technical guy, but remember we simplify the technical.
Well, it basically just gives you a way to get a longer effective focal length.
And so you screw it onto.
So you mount the teleconverter, say, onto the camera body, and then you plug the teleconverter into the back of the lens. So it's just a small piece of glass that effectively gives you a narrower angle of view to make it look like you have a longer lens. It also takes away takes away a stop of light as well. So that's the other problem with using them, is if you're already starved for shutter speed, you put that on, you definitely have to open up a stop to account for it.
So you can't open up your aperture that wide if you're using teleconverter.
Right, say I have a 600 f4 lens, I can normally go as wide as f4, but once I put a 1.4 teleconverter on it, I'm limited to 5.6. I can't go.
So it's a little darker.
It goes from a 600 f4 lens to an 840 5.6 lens. So yeah, definitely a little darker. The viewfinder's darker. The autofocus is going to slow down a little because it doesn't have as much light to work with. So there
Okay.
are disadvantages, but as far as image quality, there's very little degradation, if any. I mean,
Really?
super tack sharp stuff with both teleconverters.
And how you have a 1.4,
4 and then a 2x.
And a
Canon
2x.
makes 1.4 and the 2x.
but you use the 1.4 more often?
Yeah, especially now with the 600. I don't. With the 500, I used to use the 2x quite a bit to get
You
up to
just
1,000
wanted that
millimeters.
little bit more.
Yeah, and again, it depends what you're trying to do, especially if you're trying to do, say, a headshot or a portrait or something like that. The important thing about the teleconverters is not trying to use them to take something, say, 200 yards away, because that's just never going to work. There's just too much atmosphere between you and the subject. There's too much distortion. You're never going to see fine feather detail of something, say, 100 yards away or 150 yards away. But if you use them for the right thing, just trying to make, like, say, warblers, which are extremely small birds, larger in the frame, you'd almost have to have teleconverters to do that.
Okay. Now, do you, for the birds, like let's say shorebirds, do you have a tripod that goes really low? Or?
I use what's called the Naturescape skimmer ground pod, which basically looks like it's made of plastic and almost looks like a frying pan, but it has a bolt to screw your tripod head onto it. And that gives me, what that does for me is allows me to get low, but it also gives me much more mobility while I'm laying down. If I decide I need to move, say 5 feet to the left, I can just push it. I can just push it and then crawl up to it and push it again and crawl up to it.
Are you
I
on
don't
your
have
belly?
to stand up. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't have to stand up, which is going to, number one, spook the birds. And because the one nice thing about being down on the ground
We have a thunderstorm going
Yes,
on. I don't know if the audience can hear it, but
the one thing nice about being on the ground is the birds become you become part of the landscape more or
So
less.
they
They no longer
become more
associate
natural
you.
and
I will often have them come too close to even focus and so forth. So the last thing you want to do is stand up in order to move. So it gives me a lot more mobility.
how do you? I'm trying to understand how you can just push it if it's like an upside down frying pan, right?
Not upside down, right side up. So it's smooth on the bottom.
Oh, like a.
It's smooth on the bottom.
Oh, more like a little bowl, like a
Yeah,
shallow bowl.
exactly. Yeah.
And then it sticks above.
And then there's
edges
just
of
a stud to screw the tripod head onto.
Oh, and then that's why it slides.
Yeah.
Okay,
and so it
I was
slides.
thinking
so it's
it was
flat
the
on the
other
bottom.
way.
No,
Okay.
it's flat on the bottom, so it gives you.
And what's the name of that?
The one I use is the Naturescapes Skimmer Ground Pod.
Okay, because I've seen those before. I just didn't know. And then these people came out with this Gorilla Pod, or not
Yeah, that
Gorilla Pod,
wouldn't
not Gorilla
be-
Pod. What am I trying to think of? What is
The
it?
Platypod.
Platypod.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that wouldn't be very useful on the beach.
No.
Because again, you
It's
need to be
too-
able to move around and so forth.
Yeah,
you
yeah.
need to be able to slide.
That's cool. That's
Yeah.
cool. I didn't know about that tool
Yeah,
either.
yeah.
I wonder what else you could use that for. So, how do you keep your? Do you have any tips, like to keep? How do you stay inspired to photograph the same thing all the time,
Well,
or to
it's
stay
never
creative with
quite
it?
it's never quite the same thing. That's the thing I like about birds.
Ah, okay.
You're always going to get something a little different, either different background, different pose. That's the thing. So I have no, as far as like, to me, there's no such thing as having too many pictures of a particular species because there's always something new you can get. And that's one of the things that keeps me going, is I know there's always going to be something different out there.
Where's your favorite place to go for birds? Sounds to me like it might be Iceland.
Iceland is right up there. And in particular, we've been going to a small island off the north coast of Iceland called Grimsey Island. It's a 2 square mile island, about 25 miles off the north coast of Iceland, with about 50 people living there, and literally about 1 million seabirds in the summertime. So it's an amazing place to be. You're effectively pretty remote. You can be off on your own. There's puffins right outside your door. There's puffins everywhere. There's also lots of other seabirds, murres and razorbills, and nesting snow buntings and phalaropes, and there's probably about, never counted them, 15 or 20 species. So it's a really cool place to go.
And
So
do they have an
Iceland-
inn or someplace?
there's a
Where do you
couple- there's a
stay in
couple- there
place
are
that
a
has
couple-
50?
Yeah, there are a couple guest houses.
Okay.
So, and I've been there, been there enough times. I've developed. I was sort of the first one to actually start going there for bird photography in terms of workshops and so forth. I went there for the first time in 2014, and then I started doing workshops, and now everybody's piling onto it. So, which is great because they need the business, so it's fine with me. But there are a couple guest houses to stay at, and I've developed a lot of relationships now with the locals and stuff.
How many people do you take on your tours?
6 usually.
6.
Yeah, no more
6
than
plus
6.
you?
6 plus me.
Okay.
Yep.
And do you need transportation there then, or?
I usually either, for a while, I'll rent a vehicle of some kind, yeah. It's
Cram
even though
on.
it's only 2 square miles, it's still, when you're carrying your gear, it's like 4 miles long and a half mile wide, so it's still quite a hike to get to certain places when you're carrying all your gear, so I always have a vehicle available.
Okay.
You can take it on the ferry.
Is it
works
cold in
great.
the summer?
It's colder than here.
Well, I live in Florida.
It's usually, say, between, mornings kind of sometimes be like a little bit below 50, but it'll often get into the low 60s during the day.
Okay,
But
so
it's
that,
definitely-
I might even be able to
it's-
handle that.
Yeah,
I went
definitely.
to Ireland and it was kind of like that.
Yeah.
I went in like
It
late
can be
September,
damp,
early
which makes it feel a
October.
little colder, but
Well, that's how Ireland was.
yeah, exactly.
And it was, I
So
was
Iceland is
cold.
right up there, and the other place that's amazing is the Falkland Islands in terms of, again, just because the wildlife there has no fear of people. It's just, and again, it's a very wild place.
And how do you get
So-
there? Do you have to get there by ship or?
You can fly
Oh, you
from
can fly.
Santiago, Chile.
Okay.
You can
So you have to fly to
fly.
Santiago.
You fly to Santiago, and then
And
there's
then from
one flight a week. Every Saturday, there's one flight a week to the Falklands. So you have to go there either in multiples of weeks. You can't go for a few days.
Wow.
Unless you are on a, they do get cruise ships stopping there as well, but if you just want to go on your
That's
own.
the only, I know Artie
do a
Morris did a
land-based
cruise
tour.
ship and he was the instructor there and they went
Yeah,
to
and
the
I think
fun-
he's done some land-based tours as well.
Yeah, that's
Then
the
once
only
you get
reason
there,
I
there's
knew.
an air service that will take you from island to island.
Wow. That sounds exciting too.
It really is an amazing
Where do you go
place.
in Africa for the best birds?
I've been to Africa just for the first time this year. I've been there twice now, once to Tanzania, once to Kenya. And they weren't bird-oriented places, but I found the birds to be a little better at a place. I think we lucked into a particularly good situation at a place called Tarangire National Park in Tanzania, where, I mean, usually when you're limited to being on the roads there and you're shooting from the vehicles. And when I do that, say locally or out in the West or somewhere, you might stop every half hour when you see something, but we would never drive more than a few minutes before another opportunity arose.
Oh my gosh.
So it was pretty amazing. And then the interesting thing about the birds there is, again, in the US, when you do stop for a bird, quite often you only get like a few minutes. But these birds are so used to the vehicles being there and people being around, they'll sit for 20 minutes.
Wow.
And so it was interesting that way. But mostly the trip was more oriented toward the big
Lions
cats
and
and the other stuff. But we did stop for quite a few birds.
Yeah. Well, when we go to South Africa, we got a, it's a hoity-toity tour. So it's, we've got an exclusive private place and everything, and private game reserve and everything. But but we're doing that. But then it's varied. So we'll go down and see the penguins and go whale watching, and so
nice,
it's not just the safari.
Yeah,
So.
yeah.
It made, when the lady, she had been talking to me for a long time, and I was like, yeah, that sounds fun. But then when she put the trip together with all the variety, then I got excited, because
that'd be nice.
I get bored very easily. So that's why I wonder if I could just, even if I could I just photograph birds? I don't know. So now, what do you have coming up? You have talks and projects and workshops.
The next thing for me is the thing I'm doing Saturday over in Naples, and then I've got a workshop coming up in New Mexico at Bosque del Apache National Wildlife Refuge.
When is that?
That's in the middle of December 9th through the 12th.
Okay, because I think we are airing this after that.
Yeah, and then next year, again, I've got the 2 trips to Iceland. I do 1 trip in May and 1 trip in July.
Do you have openings?
What's that?
Do you have openings?
Yes, I do, for both of those.
May
definitely.
and July.
May and
Iceland.
July. The May is more of a combination bird and landscape trip where you see more of the mainland of Iceland and we travel around. The July trip is specifically to go to this island. We just spend 5 full days on the island. It's basically 24/7. You can be out there as much as you want. You're right there, puffins outside your door. So it's a very bird-centric, photo-intensive one. Whereas the other, you get a little more culture, you get a little more of we have an Icelandic guide on that one who adds, can tell us a lot about, other things as well than just the photography. Then also in March, I'm coming down for the Florida Camel Cub Council Conference.
Oh yeah, you're a speaker at our statewide conference.
Yeah, so I'll be doing talks on using flash for bird photography, doing manual exposure, just bird photography in general, and I think one in particularly that concentrates on autofocus in terms of autofocus features and how to get sharp pictures.
Okay, that's always a good
especially
thing.
for birds. That's really what it's all about, is seeing that beautiful detail.
That's awesome. So maybe I'll go to that. Maybe it'll inspire me to get into bird photography. I don't know why. I mean, there's so many beautiful birds right now. That painted buntings. I've had that thing for years. I have never had the desire to pick up my camera and take a picture of them for some reason. I'm just happy. Well, she knows because she's in the other office. I'm like, Mrs. Painted Bunting is here. Or Mr. And if Mr. comes, then I get really excited, So where can our audience find you? What's your website?
Oh, it's probably the shortest way is miliciaphoto.com. So it's MILICIA photo.com.
MILICIA
photo.com. Yeah. Or michaelmiliciaphotography.com.
You have that one
typing.
too.
Yep.
They all come to the same place though, right?
They all go to the same place. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I'm on Facebook as well. I've got a business page on Facebook under Michael Milicia Photography, and that's really where I post most of my images now. So if you want to just see the stuff I'm doing, the website is kind of a snapshot in time in terms of I just have a couple, maybe 60 pictures out there. If you want to see what I'm doing in real time, more or less,
follow
the
you
Facebook
on Facebook
page is the place to be,
and
Instagram as well, but more Facebook.
Okay, yeah, me too. It seems that my customers are on Facebook more than Instagram, even though everybody's like, "Oh, Instagram's the place to be," but it seems like my customers are all on Facebook. So, although I'm not that good at Facebook either, so although I seem to waste time on it, I'm good at that. Well, thank you for being on the Understand Photography
No
Show.
problem. Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
And to the audience, thank you for joining us. If you would do us a favor and leave us a review on iTunes, that would be great. I mean, anywhere is great, but iTunes gives us the most bang for our buck as far as the podcast listeners. We are getting a good amount of people listening, so that makes me feel good. If you ever have any suggestions, just email me at peggy@understandphotography.com if you have suggestions for guests or suggestions for topics or anything like that. Just give me an email. I'm an email kind of person. That's my best way to communicate. I'm Peggy Farron. Thanks for joining us on the Understand Photography Show. We'll see you next Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time.